Ready.
Welcome to my presentation on factors influencing change in the Prince Edward Island lobster fishery. We'll review the problem statement. We'll look at the reasons for my personal interest in this research. We'll review 3 research questions, and we'll look at some of the sources for background literature. We'll review the methodology that was used to conduct the research, and then we'll review key findings and come up with some conclusions. In 2013, maritime lobster fishers went on strike. Prices had dropped by 25% or $1 a pound. The strike lasted for about a week, but no one seemed to know why prices had dropped. Some said the recovery from the 2009 economic downturn was not yet complete. The maritime fisheries ministers commissioned a panel to study the industry and find some solutions. The Maritime Lobster Panel report listed 33 recommendations to improve an industry that some claimed was structured to underperform and was in some ways dysfunctional. Lobster sales represent about 70% of the value of the island's fishery, and the lobster industry creates about 8,500 seasonal jobs on PEI. My personal interest in this research goes back to 2014 when lobster fishers petitioned PEI Marketing Council, where I work, to conduct a plebiscite for the forming of a commodity board. I was appointed as returning officer, and there are over 1,200 lobster fishers in PEI, so it was quite an undertaking. I had some experience with marketing boards, being a past chair of the dairy farmers of PEI, and following the plebiscite, when the results were in, I had some questions about the lobster industry itself, so I turned those questions into the research questions for this thesis. Why did island lobster fishers move ahead first to form a commodity board to collect the promotional levy, which would undoubtedly help fishers in neighboring provinces, when there was no guarantee that those fishers would do the same? And was this decision influenced by islandness? Secondly, how have fishers in other small islands organized themselves to take more control over their fisheries and have more valuable input at the decision-making table? And how have other Prince Edward Island marketing boards fared in their attempts to improve returns for their producers based on the characteristics of their commodities and the powers conferred on their respective boards by the province of PEI? And what lessons might the lobster fishers of PEI learn from previous and existing island marketing boards? This map of the LFAs, or lobster fishing areas, in Atlantic Canada, it shows there are, if you follow my mouse, about 41 lobster fishing areas in Atlantic Canada. The ones we're going to talk about today are LFA 24 along the north shore of PEI, LFA 25, which is in western PEI in the Northumberland Strait between New Brunswick and PEI, and that's a fall fishery, and LFA 26A from Victoria through the Northumberland Strait around Wood Islands and up to East Point, and that's another spring fishery as well. Background literature, where did we look for information? We looked in government reports and websites, especially the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We looked at some federal and provincial legislation. We looked at commodity board regulations under the Act, some board orders and reports. And we looked at academic research papers through Google Scholar and some gray literature, magazines. And we looked at some information from the Maine state lobster fishery, as well as US marketing orders and agreements. And a little bit on islandness, since the program is about islandness. Islandness is a human characteristic, a sensation, being more in touch with nature. It's a state of being as a result of living isolated or insulated, cut off physically and or culturally from the outside world. Rory McCabe from Clare Island in in Ireland describes islandness as an awareness of various island identities such as population size, built infrastructure, tourism, the environment, seasonality. It's the framework that shapes the island experience. And it's also a feeling you get from being on an island that life is somehow different there. I followed a mixed methods research approach. In addition to documentary sources from the gray literature, government and research reports, this study uses primary interviews to identify the role of islandness on the decision of PEI fishers to form the commodity board. Other documentary sources included quantitative and qualitative data from government and non-governmental agencies, the state of Maine lobster landings, PEI government annual statistical reviews, information from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, as well as quality narratives, including media reporting from CBC, local island newspaper stories, and reports and plans from commodity boards associated with other products such as the PEI Potato Board and the Canadian Wheat Board. These information sources have been integrated with insights from peer-reviewed literature to address the research questions of the thesis. And this is commonly referred to as a mixed methods approach because it attempts to incorporate perspectives from different sources to uncover patterns or different points of view. We used Google Scholar to search academic papers and government reports using key terms such as lobster fishery, marketing board, promotion and research, and in various combinations. A similar search strategy was conducted to find information on government authority and responsibility for fisheries, organizational structures and management strategies, marketing and promotion programs, and sustainability of the lobster fishery in small islands and other coastal areas around the world. And a little on reflexivity, or what biases or preconceived ideas I may have brought to this research. I have worked within the supply managed dairy industry in Canada, and I bring a perspective of the benefits of supply management to some types of food production. I also believe in the need to share profits with all efficient participants to enjoy sustainable production. And it's hoped that an understanding of these attitudes allows me to put them into perspective and not discard out of hand evidence that may be contradictory to my values and beliefs. How do we address problems of oversupply and low prices? As the lobster fishers have done, one option is to create a marketing board or slow down the race to fish. We could also impose restrictions on fishing areas or fishing gear. We could set a total allowable catch, implement a stabilization program, try what has worked elsewhere, such as Maine, or do nothing and let market forces prevail. Some of the findings from the literature review, island lobster landings had doubled over the period from 2009 to 2019. Catches rose from 21 million pounds to over 42 million pounds, but during that time, prices had dropped significantly, twice. When individuals know how much fish they can take, competition and fishing pressure are reduced. Having fishers directly involved in fisheries management improves buy-in because fishers are part of the decision-making team. Total allowable catches with individual transferable quotas can mitigate the race to fish. A negotiated shore pricing system has been recommended based on prestige and quality, not volume, where prices cannot be raised without a rationale for doing so. A grading system for lobster was recommended by the Lobster Council of Canada, where utility lobsters, such as those missing a claw, or those with soft shells or lower meat content, could be discounted to ensure a premium price for the top grade. User groups, as opposed to individuals, are better able to reduce environmental damage and improve product quality. The 2013 Maritime Lobster Panel report concluded that the lobster industry in the Maritimes was not achieving best value for production. The authors of the report concluded that a more cooperative approach was needed by all components of the industry. The Maritime Lobster Panel noted that fishers said they would like to see several different shore prices for lobster to ensure there was no collusion among buyers, but at the same time, they all wanted the highest price. Federal legislation, such as the Farm Products Agencies Act, allows for the creation of promotion and research agencies at the national level, while the Agriculture Products Marketing Act allows for the collection of levies in interprovincial and export trade. Unfortunately, seafood is not included in the federal legislation as it is in the Provincial Natural Products Marketing Act, but it is still possible for provincial commodity boards to cooperate through an agreement outside of federal legislation, similar to what agencies like Canada Beef have in place for beef producers. The Provincial Natural Products Marketing Act allows for the establishment of commodity boards. A range of powers are available to any new commodity board. The 6 other active boards have all acquired different ranges of powers depending upon the nature of their commodity and their markets. The Potato Board, for instance, has a board order in place to enable growers to negotiate prices with processors before potatoes are planted. Supply managed producers are able to regulate production and to some degree pricing, transportation, and distribution, as well as conduct research and promotion programs for their members. Eastern and Western Canadian dairy farmers have 2 pools in place to allow for the sharing of markets and revenues. A stabilization plan for the fishery was studied in the 1980s. Upon close examination, it was found that there was actually more variability in farm incomes from year to year than in fishing incomes, even when all the farm support payments were included in the calculations. However, due to the fact that subsidies might still be needed, which could attract countervailing trade action by the neighbors to the south, the government felt that employment insurance was a better option for the fishery. In the US, marketing orders and marketing agreements are tools established by law and available to industry to provide stable markets for milk, fruit, vegetables, specialty crops, and some seafood products. In 2013, the Maine state legislature passed a bill creating a new 5-year lobster marketing initiative known as the Maine Lobster Marketing Collaborative. In Maine, 2 options for raising marketing and promotion funds were being discussed. It was a levy of a penny per pound on all lobster landed at the first point of sale, or a license surcharge of 1% of lobster landed value. There was a pushback from the lobster license holders that a penny per pound levy would impose too much of an administrative burden at the first point of sale. So the industry opted for the second strategy involving a surcharge on the annual license fee or renewal for buyers, fishers, transporters, processors, basically anyone who touched lobster in the state of Maine. And a little on island economies. When people live at a distance from the outside world and are therefore thrown more upon their own resources, they're more likely to develop a spirit of community and solidarity. Small island economies, though, can be vulnerable to erratic market fluctuations. But this vulnerability can be mitigated by forming or maintaining ties with larger outside economies. But it depends again on the type of island and its smallness, remoteness, and islandness. Some of the key findings from the interviews, some adjectives used to describe islandness include independence, loyalty, even between enemies, and a sense of honor. Occupational multiplicity or handiness mixed with common sense may go a long way towards self-sufficiency. Frugality is important, as well as a measure of discretion regarding how much of what you hear should actually be repeated. There's also a perceived character of islanders as entrepreneurial individualists. So some of the questions from the research earlier, what did island fishers, or why did island fishers establish the commodity board? Island lobster fishers had to look inward and ask how they saw themselves in the world and in the lobster fishery. They saw themselves as price takers, lacking information, and needing a stronger voice. Fishers in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia were getting higher prices. Island fishers were at a disadvantage. They needed to know the price of lobsters before they left the wharf and before the season started. Did islandness play a role? There are several examples of how islandness may have played a role in the decision. The strike provided an example of how fishers could unite for a common good, even though they competed with each other to get the best fishing grounds and catch the same fish. Because of the nature of the fishery, living on an island, and because of the Prince Edward Island Fishermen's Association, deep down they had each other's backs when they needed to work together, and in 2013 they needed better information and better prices. Transportation costs are high to get island lobster to mainland markets. Islanders are further from large centers of population and international airports. What have fishers in other areas done? The use of marine protected areas with strict conditions on who is able to fish, along with preset catch limits, have worked well in areas such as the Azores and Portugal, but monitoring is key. Other areas set total allowable catches with individual transferable quotas. And this system works well if stock assessments are accurate. If fishers' livelihoods are on the line, they will usually monitor fishing effort and adjust accordingly. Fish do move around, however, but lobsters are more solitary and much less mobile than many species. A Scottish inshore fisheries group responded positively early on by being included in management decisions of an EU fishery, even though they were not yet sure of the potential of the group. And governance usually works best with a combination of government representatives and fishers making the decisions. What have other marketing boards done? Well, the 7 marketing boards established on PEI under the Natural Products Marketing Act are authorized by government but controlled by producers to regulate one or more of the functions of marketing. A marketing board gives primary producers a united voice, but there must be trust in the leadership. And what else could island fishers do? Well, a negotiated pricing formula for island lobster fishers would provide more transparency for everyone along the lobster value chain. A lobster grading system could ensure fair prices for fishers, buyers, and processors. The goal should be, though, for fishers to achieve a fair return, and no party should try to squeeze all the returns from the marketplace for themselves. Interprovincial pooling agreements can be reached inside or outside of supply management to regulate production, organize transportation to processing facilities, or to carry out generic marketing and promotion programs. It may be time for lobster fishers to revisit the idea of implementing a quota system, since lobster buyers are quick to limit the amount of lobster purchased if markets are oversupplied. And as evidenced by the United Potato Growers, prices are usually stronger when markets are just slightly underserved. To create a larger pool of marketing dollars and to ensure that everyone contributes, fishers should lobby the island government and request that other maritime provinces follow suit to implement a surcharge on the issuance and renewal of all lobster fishing licenses, processing licenses, and transporting licenses in the maritime provinces for everyone that touches lobsters, similar to the system implemented in the state of Maine. The creation of a maritime-wide generic lobster marketing group or pool under the umbrella of the Lobster Council of Canada could work well for the lobster industry. The group could be comprised of fishers, buyers, and processors based on the amount of dollars contributed by each. By pooling resources, efficiencies and cost savings should be realized. And in working together, there's a chance that a rising tide would not only lift all boats, but a rising tide of cooperation could lift all livelihoods as well. Questions?
Great, thank you. This is where we all applaud. Yay! And we can.
Great work.
Not the same on
Great.
Zoom.
Okay, so thanks very much, Ian. That was lovely, and you were right on time. This is absolutely terrific. Okay, so we will begin now with our first round of questions. If people would either a speaker view or gallery view, whichever works best for you, just feel free to arrange your screen accordingly. Our first set of questions will come from Dr. James, and you now have the floor.
Great job, Ian. Your research is really interesting. You've tackled some tough subjects. It's a challenging industry, as everyone knows. So I really appreciate it. It was a really interesting read. I have kind of a big question because there's so many stakeholders and the dynamics in this industry are so interesting. Who do you think benefits the most from your research?
That's a very good question. It could be that there are individuals in the lobster fishery that are interested in maybe making changes to the way they first of all had formed the board, and following that, a lot of commodity boards evolve how they carry out their promotion. So I would say other actually newer groups, maybe for instance, we'll talk about the blueberry growers. If they were interested in moving from a commodity group to a commodity board, they could look at, you know, the successes of the boards that have been and are not in place now, but also those who are in existence now, and the evolution of how they've carried out their duties on behalf of the members moving forward. And you can see an evolution within many of them. For instance, the dairy farmers have changed their promotion from local to regional to national and back to local again. So there's a lot of information that would benefit, you know, the lobster industry, other groups that are looking to form a commodity board, and those commodity boards that are in existence as well.
Lori, do I just ask one question right now and then, yes, okay.
No, you can ask another one if you want, go ahead. Yep.
So no, thank you for that, because there are so many different audiences or potential audiences for your research. Can you, when you look through, you know, everything from literature right through to drafting your conclusions, what were the biggest challenges that you faced doing your research?
Well, I'll be honest, when I did the research, there wasn't a lot of information available on other commodity boards within the fishery. So when I did the Google search strategy, I came back with, I found a lot of information on other commodity boards, but they were mostly agricultural. The challenge with the fishery is a lot of fishing species are overexploited or depleted. Not all of them, a third of them, they say in the literature, but so their problem is not so much organizing into a commodity board, it's to be able to manage the fish that they have when they have large populations that need food. So it's more a management strategy rather than an organizational strategy for the fishermen. It's more managing the resource to ensure that it's sustainable. The fortunate part with the Atlantic area is the resource is sustainable, but they've put a lot of work into putting regulations and policies in place to take traps out of production, to take licenses out of production, whenever they saw the resource was starting to drop down to below what was able to, you know, keep the harvest at the same level.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'll let other people ask, Lori, and then I'll circle back if that's okay.
That's terrific. Thanks so much, Melissa. All right, Tim, you're up next.
Yes, congratulations, Ian. Enjoyed your thesis and working with you. I'm particularly interested in, because of the way the research went and bringing in the concept of islandness. So I wanted to ask you, now that you've collected the data and done quite a bit of thinking and work on this, how, in terms of your idea of what islandness is, how do you feel that that affects the lobster fishers' plans with respect to how far they're willing to go in terms of controlling the market? Like, you present all kinds of options that they could do, which are all available to them under the Natural Products Marketing Act. So I'm asking you, what do you think the role that islandness plays in that decision for them to exercise those powers?
It's really hard to separate the islandness out of some of the other factors. The fact that the island lobster fishers continue to catch about 60% of canner lobster, to me, it would make sense to leave those lobsters for another year or two and get another 50 cents a pound for them. But on PEI, 60% of the lobsters are sold at kind of a discounted price in a way, because Nova Scotia sells about 80% of their lobsters as markets into the fresh market, and New Brunswick has quite a bit of their catch going into the fresh market because of Grand Manan being a part. So the islandness factor, I think the islanders were right in doing what they did to form a group. I think it was necessary to form a group other than the Prince of Wales Fishermen's Association, because this way they're just talking with lobster fishers. But it's very important to work with the processors and the other members in the value chain, because as the dairy industry found out, you all have to work well together in order to for everyone to succeed. So the islandness part of the whole equation is it's difficult to tease out, and I can see why island lobster fishers moved ahead to form the board, but that was just the first step. I think what they need to do now is continue to talk with their counterparts and pool their money. They would get a better return for their money, and they realize that they have each other's backs, even though, as I said, they had to compete with each other for fishing grounds and fish. But it's more about looking at the new entrants coming into the industry. They're more heavily leveraged because quotas and licenses and whatnot, or not quotas, but caps and licenses are more expensive. When you're near the point in time where you're going to exit the industry, you've got a lot of equity built up. You're not so concerned about, what's the price of lobster going to be over the next 10 years. You're more concerned about how much am I going to get for my fleet if I sell it, if I don't have a family member to pass it on to. So the younger fishers now are the ones that are really concerned about sustainability, about prices. And it's not, as I said, about getting all the money out of the marketplace for themselves. It's a sharing so that everybody gets enough to ensure that they're able to continue in their business. So it's difficult to sort out all that islandness and kind of set it aside and talk about it. Islandness seems to influence all the decisions along the way. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tim. Next up, we have questions from Dr. Jim.
Thanks a lot, Laurie, and thanks, Ian. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and seeing how your thoughts have developed over the last few years on this topic. Maybe I'll take up where Tim left off there in terms of his questions about islandness, and maybe I'll start with a simple one, but your answer may be a little bit more complicated than my question here, and that is, I noticed the presentation, the title of your presentation didn't have the word islandness in it. Whereas the thesis title did have the word islandness as the first word. So I'm curious whether should I read something into the difference between those two, or have you given some thought to about the role that islandness might play in the thesis itself, based on the fact that it wasn't in the title of your presentation?
I did edit that out. I think when I did get some feedback from the external reviewer, I did agree with a lot of the points that she had made. And with islandness at the first of the title, you would expect there would be a lot more islandness and maybe less fishery in the whole presentation. And I think in a way, islandness is an influence, but it's not as big as the whole industry. The marketing boards, the plebiscite, there was a lot of area covered in the theses. And I think the islandness now, from looking back at it, it's an influencer, but maybe not the most important part of the whole presentation. That's not saying island studies is, you know, this presentation doesn't belong in island studies, but maybe it's not the most important part of my research, but it certainly still is important.
I tend to agree with you, Ian, and I think this is still an island studies thesis, regardless of the fact that you may not have that word in the title. And remember, islandness is not the same as island studies. It's one aspect of it. Our chair might think that different, but it's one aspect of a much larger interdisciplinary field. So I think you're justified perhaps in revising the title to the thesis. Maybe I could follow up on this a little bit in terms of islandness, because when I read through the thesis, it seemed as though most of the conclusions or the findings about islandness were related to the interviews, semi-structured interviews. But I didn't see anything there in terms of either the gray literature or government reports in magazines, etc., that picked up on islandness. Was there anything from those sources? Because one of the reasons why you do mixed methods is to try to see whether you can corroborate or complement some of the findings. So was there anything from the other aspects of your quote unquote data set that actually either supported or didn't support the influence of these characteristics of islanders and the island culture?
I think there were definitely some research papers that were heavily weighted on the islandness, especially one on the Grand Manan fishery. You know, it certainly has a big part to play in the relationships between the people. It has a big, there's kind of a wall in a way built there about insiders and outsiders. So in order to be accepted, you know, you have to kind of manage to break through that islandness wall, or this the type of thinking that influences you know, that smaller island. I guess there were a lot of studies that talked about small islands. But the lobster fishery in those islands, because of larger populations, warmer waters, different parts of the world, it was quite a bit different than the lobster fishery in Atlantic Canada. And the islandness part there was more trying to, you know, allow people to take enough lobster for their own needs, rather than look at export markets where we're so privileged here that we're able to export 80 or 85% of what we have. So the islandness, I think it was there, but because of the nature of the resource and the amount of it, I think most of the papers I looked at were probably more towards the lobster fishery side and marketing board side, and maybe not quite as much on the islandness side that I included anyway.
Okay, and one more question that relates to islandness. As I sort of alluded to in my last comments, it seemed as though most of your conclusions on characteristics related to islandness were from the interviews. And I guess maybe if this is a question about methodology as much as anything, how do you know that some of those characteristics aren't shared by the Nova Scotia lobster fishers or the New Brunswick lobster fishers or the Newfoundland lobster fishers, since you didn't interview fishers from those provinces? You only interviewed people from PEI and sort of took by extension the fact that those characteristics are defining features of this group as opposed to the others.
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was looking at some of the literature, they talked about different kinds of islands, and one of the types was a settlement island. And Prince Edward Island seemed to fit into that mold where we have groups of like people moving from, we'll just say Ireland or France or somewhere, and settling in an area and maintaining a lot of the connections with the homeland, but they kind of say rustico here, and it's got a lot of French ancestry there. Their way of thinking may be similar in regions like that. So when it comes to the fishery, and the fishery is important there, as well as all around the island, they maybe tend to, because they've been on this island for a number of generations, they tend to be a little tighter knit. They're more used to, now we have a link to the mainland, but we have been kind of isolated, kind of insulated a little being on the island, and I think their decision making has been influenced somewhat by where they've been, where they've come from, and as well as the lobster fishery itself. It has a history back to the 1800s, and back then there was a large resource which quickly got decimated by overexploitation. And when I'm kind of losing my train of thought here, but when, well, I'll have to abandon that thought.
That's all right. Could I ask one more question related to islandness, Laurie? It makes sense to ask it now rather than wait till the next round. I looked at your questions that you posed in the semi-structured interviews, and that was a lot of questions. I think you had 26 listed there. But then I thought, I put my island studies hat on, and I thought, well, which of those 26 questions actually relates to islandness? I saw a lot of questions that related to the other factors, but I didn't see anything. For example, I didn't see a question that said something like, do you believe that, being an islander might have influenced, the fact that you live in this island influenced the way you carry out your job or carry out your day-to-day? And that's probably not the way to phrase the question. But so how confident are you that you're able to capture this islandness dimension when I didn't see any sort of questions that were directly related to what you might call island way of life or islandness?
Well, I did try to capture themes that related to especially occupational multiplicity, where people they live on the island. Some people are able to, if they need cash, they are able to, or they are forced to go out west for a few months, make some cash and come back, or continue this 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, for some people do it for years. So the people that stay here develop this occupational multiplicity where they have to be, you know, fairly handy at trades and other part-time jobs in order to keep busy through the year. So you can identify some issues related to islandness from the employment. You can, I think other ways that we could narrow down the islandness. The lobster pricing was a big issue. It's a big issue with every primary producer and or fisher, because that's, you know, they get paid what's left over after they pay their expenses. So everybody's concerned with price, and they want to make sure they're getting enough to pay the bills and have some left over. So because of the way the lobster fishery on the island has evolved, we've kind of got into this, because we're on an island, we've carved out a different market for the lobster. Traditionally, we've canned it, but we've never ever gotten away from canning, whereas canning lobster, you know, declined quite a bit in the 1930s and 40s, and pretty well was given up for most of the lobster going into the fresh market in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Well, New Brunswick does a lot of canning, but a lot of that lobster comes from Maine as well. So I tried to identify, you know, areas where islandness might impact decisions that fishers made. You're right, there was a lot of other information in the questions. I had to kind of get people warmed up to answer the questions, and I was dealing with males, so maybe they don't want to offer as many, you know, feelings and thoughts and opinions, but I took what I got, and I did go over the list of questions with another supervisor. So I think I probably didn't, I think I got a certain amount of islandness out of it. There may have been more to get, but I used what I got from the interviews, and I put that into the thesis to try and see what influence that had, mainly on the decision to form the marketing board.
Okay, thanks. I'll just end here by saying, Ian, many of these questions you get from us, there's often no right or wrong answers. We're really trying to figure out what your response is going to be and how well you're able to respond to the question. And so don't be worried if you lose your train of thought. I think we all lose our train of thought every once in a while.
Okay.
I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Jim. All right, we're now on to round 2 of questions. And so I would like to invite Melissa James again to jump in with some questions. Thanks.
Well, Jim stole my question on the islandness and the interview guide. So, and it was a good answer. So thank you, Ian, for that. It's obviously on our mind. And as Jim said, there's no right or wrong answer. We just want to know your thoughts and how you voice that. Picking up on the marketing board, and you just referenced it, but we talked about it earlier around how there really wasn't anything comparable in the fishery realm. How did you compare across those industries? Like what criteria or factors did you look for to compare those marketing boards?
I was really interested in the powers that the commodity boards had applied for from the government of PEI. Obviously, there's a difference in the powers in the control that supply managed boards have compared to non-supply managed boards. And most of the supply managed boards would apply for more powers, although they don't all have the same powers. The dairy farmers have all the powers under the Act, of which there are probably 30. The cattle producers have about 18, and the lobster fishers have about 18. Now, just having 18 powers doesn't mean a whole lot. It's which powers do they have. So in order to compare one board with another, I just wanted to see what were the boards able to deliver to their members, to the people that voted them in, and how were the boards able to deliver on the for the levies that producers are paying, and, you know, are the marketing and promotion programs benefiting, what kind of return are lobster fishers or cattle producers getting for their investment in marketing and promotion, for instance. And there was some information there, 2 studies from the cattle industry where, you know, they looked at for each dollar put in, it was, you know, $9 or $14 returned. So the lobster fishers, I think they could move forward a little bit, although it's taken 5 years for them to get their marketing campaign sorted out because they came from zero. And it always takes 5 years to get to, you know, a point where you're getting comfortable with investing money in marketing and promotion. And of course, with the internet, everything changed again on where you spend that. But in order to compare one board with another, you know, it's difficult to say they've been, you know, 70% successful after 5 years. But in their own minds, are they getting a good return on the money they pay for levies? And then again, are they putting enough money in? When you compare how much actual money the lobster fishers are paying and what they're getting compared to, you know, what some of the other the dairy farmers are paying, what the chicken farmers and the egg farmers are paying, there's quite a difference in the amount of money that each board is investing, and probably a big difference in the amount of return that they're getting as well. So I didn't do a breakdown analysis. A lot of the data I collected was secondary data, and I didn't reanalyze that, if that's what you mean. So I kind of did a comparison rather than a reanalysis, I guess, of the data. But I did pick up on one of your suggestions to put a table into the index of into the appendices of the theses, where it would be a lot easier to compare the powers that each board has under the Act, rather than to try and filter through pages and pages of written powers that, you know, it's kind of hard to put apples against apples. So I do have a table drafted up, which it would be nice if I could put that into the thesis.
Okay. I just have one follow-up question. When we talk about power, in your conclusions, or, you know, you talk about negotiating prices. How do you envision that happening? What do you, when you make that claim?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the potato board in 2009 was able to draft a board order to lay out how they negotiate with buyers on volume and price, and deadlines that have to be met in order to ensure that the potato growers know before they plant potatoes what kind of a price they're getting. So potato producers don't have to put everything, put all their money up front and into the ground and then find out I'm getting 9 cents or 11 cents a pound for my potatoes. So the same with the lobster fishers. There are, you know, the Magdalene Islands and Newfoundland, and I'll be honest, I don't know how their pricing negotiations work. But in the province of Quebec, everything to do with agriculture is negotiated. They have a little different system than we have on the island as far as the Régie versus the Marketing Council. But I would see the lobster fishers come up, I would like to see them come up with some type of a cost of production. Then, and the potato producers do that as well. And every year they recrunch the numbers. So they have a pretty good idea on what their expenses are and what they have to get in order to cover costs and have a return to investment and some profit at the other end. So I would see a cost of production of some sort that would be necessary, and then negotiate with buyers on how much lobsters, how much the price would be for lobsters, maybe not for the whole season, but for the first week or two of the season, and then rejig the numbers. So it's got to be fair for processors and buyers and fishers. and at the other end, retailers. So if it's based on something like cost of production, then it can be transparent. And I think everybody could be comfortable with that. And if the processors or the market can't pay the money, don't put that many fish on the market. Cut back.
Okay, interesting. All right, no, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Next up, we have Tim Carroll with another round of questions.
Okay. So I want to reiterate Jim's point. The question I'm going to ask has no right or wrong answer. So after you've done the work on looking at the marketing board, in your view, what powers do you think the lobster marketing board should consider taking on?
They have the power to pool, so they can pool their marketing and levies now. They could do that at the regional level, or they could do it at the Pan-Atlantic level and have all five in. But there's got to be, I think, a bigger pool of dollars, and they could move forward on that one if they can get some agreement. And I think that would be, you know, if they could base it on a return on investment, then I think that would encourage fishers from other provinces to join in. As far as other powers, right now they have the power they don't have the power to negotiate price, but they can buy and sell. So I think they need to get the power to negotiate price before they can move ahead in that area.
So they already have the power. Are you saying, Ian, that they already have the power to basically central sell? If they can buy and sell the product, then they can centrally sell it. In other words, all the sales are authorized by them and controlled by them.
That's a little bit gray to me. It says they have the power to purchase and sell the product, but they don't have the power to fix prices.
Yeah, good point. But they could add that power. So that's what I'm interested in now, Ian. What do you think they should do?
What do I think they should do?
Should they continue to just take the price that's offered, or should they take measures to take more control of price?
To be honest, Tim, I haven't talked to enough lobster fishers to be able to respond accurately to that. A second point,
accurate answer.
What's that?
There is no accurate answer, Ian.
Yeah, and the other thing is, as I have a position with the PEI Marketing Council, I don't want to be seen. This is Ian's basic thesis, and I don't want this to be Ian McIsaac Marketing Council thesis, because I'm not allowed to push my opinion through the Marketing Council office. So I got
I would want you to base it on your research.
On my research.
Yeah.
I think the logical first step would be to move ahead with pooling on marketing and promotion money. If we crunch the numbers, if each lobster fisher paid $850, they'd have $1 million to use for marketing and promotion. Right now they're paying around $300. They do have $400,000, but as you know, a lot of that gets chewed up in administration and running an office, and all of a sudden you only have, you know, $300,000 to actually do marketing and promotion. They do a great job with the money they have, but they don't have a lot of money. So, you know, the dairy industry probably spends $1.5 million provincially. So we got to get a little bit more money in order to be able to do some more work, if they're interested in doing that. I think the other commodity boards are, but the lobster fishers, it would be interesting to do a little more research 5 years in and say, are you happy with the board? Are you happy with, you know, your return? Are they doing enough for you? And is there more they can do if you had a couple of more powers there?
Tim, do you have any follow-ups?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Ian. It's great.
Hey, great, thanks, Tim. Last but not least, Jim Randall.
Sure. Just a comment, and I'm surprised I didn't think of this as I've been going through a thesis several times now, Ian, but on page 48, 49 of your thesis, you talk about the theme of competition and cooperation. And it reminds me that that I did some research on the biotech sector in PEI using the mixed method approach, interviews, etc. And that was one of the themes that I came up with as well. And I forgot to mention that, so I can give you the source there, and you might want to add that into either that section or another section, so that you have a little bit more sort of foundational literature that backs up some of what you found, but in this case in a different sector on Prince Edward Island, a similar sort of islandness type of theme. And I can give you that source, we can add that in pretty simply. I guess I have another question related to methodology, and that's saturation. And I know, like, I'm not going to get too hung up on the fact that you only had 6 semi-structured interviews, because I can understand that if this is a rich data set, you had a long conversation with these people, and especially if you're not trying to generalize, you have to be very careful there, because even some of the questions that have been posed by your committee and your answers, it's easy to start generalizing beyond the 6 interviews that you had. But maybe I could just ask you to speak a little bit more on why you believe that you had reached a saturation point after 6 interviews.
Yeah, thank you. The interviews were done before the before the thesis was launched, or early on. So when I interviewed the fishers, I, as you say, had about 26 questions, and the ones that I really wanted to get more information on, especially, were they familiar with the situation in Maine, as far as, you know, the levy that they had discussed there, and there was 2 different approaches to collecting the money: a surcharge on the licenses, or a penny per pound levy. Not that many of the fishers were familiar with what exactly had happened in Maine. They all have information about Maine, but it's maybe not it's not research grounded, so it's more information that's coffee shop chatter. So when I wanted or the information I was looking, questions I was asking on the Maine fishery, and well, even the other questions on the islandness and the cooperation and the conflict and the levy itself, we could get good information on situations about conflict, levels of cooperation in the fishery. As far as the levy, that was something that I didn't maybe get as much information as maybe I had hoped. So after those 6 interviews were done, and I analyzed the data, it was kind of seen that if I continued those interviews, I probably wouldn't get a lot more useful information or new information. So at that point, it was decided that maybe we had reached saturation. Small studies usually reach saturation earlier than large ones. And in order to get a more rounded look at the influences of islandness and why the Lobster Board was formed, it might be better just to go look in other sources that, you know, if we could put those together and point to the same areas, or triangulate, then we may come up with more accurate information.
Okay, thanks, Ian, and I'm finished, Laurie.
Great, well, thank you. So this is a time where I will ask each of our examiners if they have one more last question or comment before I open it up to the floor.
I'm fine.
I'm
Okay.
good.
All right, and Jim, okay, well, that's great. So why don't we see if there are any questions out here from the audience? I've had one from Adam Fennick, who's out where he says internet is sketchy, so he would ask if I would ask for it because he wasn't quite sure that the internet would bear up if he comes on with his microphone and screen and his camera. So this is a question, as he says, from the cheap seats. He's surprised to not hear the word climate change when talking about the PEI lobster fishery. The record landings on PEI over the last decade can be attributed directly to the increase in ocean temperatures. These temperature increases are expected to continue over the next decade to a point where the PEI lobster fishery is expected to have the same challenges as what was happening in Maine. So is the PEI lobster fishery discussing this future? Is anything being done to prepare for the bust? Thanks, Adam.
When I was out speaking with lobster fisheries, there was more talk about the demise of the cod stocks and the lack of predation on lobster. I didn't hear much about climate change from the lobster fishers. So I did find some information in the states below the state of Maine where lobster fisheries had actually been closed temporarily because ocean temperatures had warmed and stocks were maybe decreasing to the point where sustainability was an issue. So other information I got was that even though the lobster landings in the state of Maine from 1985 to the current time had, or to 2017 had increased about fourfold, in the last couple of years, the landings had dropped down again. So whether that was climate related, I can't say, but considering what happened below them, that may be a possibility. But most of what I heard was the lobster stocks were rising because there was very little predation, and I didn't hear much about climate change. Although I appreciate Dr. Fennick's work in the climate change area, and he may be more up to date on climate change and the lobster fishery, but I didn't find that.
Great, well, thank you.
Yeah, okay, I'll call
I'm
her.
just
I
trying to
never heard from her yet.
Tim, there we go. Okay, I have a question here from Charlie Sark, and thanking you, first of all, Ian, for a very informative presentation. His question is whether or not you include the voice of Mi'kmaq fishers in your research design. Also, how prevalent was the, quote, blaming of Indians within the narratives you collected, if at all?
No, we did meet with the, back when we were running the plebiscite, we did meet with the First Nations people, and they said right off the bat, when the lobster industry wants to collect a levy through the maritime provinces, we'll be interested in doing that. But if they're just collecting it from PEI, we don't feel at that point that we want to put our money in just for a provincial marketing and promotion campaign. So when we moved ahead and the lobster board was formed, it was well understood that the native people would probably be interested when we got Nova Scotia and New Brunswick on board. But for now, they were right up front and said that they weren't going to put their money up at that point. So we knew that right off the bat.
Could I just interject there a little bit, Laurie? It's Jim here.
Yes, please go ahead.
And maybe I don't want to necessarily sort of give you the answer here, Ian, but I think the other part of that, and I think what Charlie's referring to is in terms of your own research design. And it's my understanding that you did these interviews sort of before much of the unfortunate tension that more recently has emerged elsewhere in the Maritimes. Is that correct?
Okay, I missed that point. Yes, there was no mention of Native people in a negative way at all. And the 6 interviews that I had done were basically a convenient sample. There were people that I may have knew or known or may have had a connection with, and I contacted 12 and 6 said no and 6 said yes. So that was a very small sample size, and that there really was no mention, although I did make a tiny mention in the last part of the thesis about the use of a quota system would allow all fishers to be able to catch an agreed upon amount of lobster. So that reduces the race to fish, reduces the competition between fishers, and everybody knows how much lobster they're able to catch. So whether it's native or non-native or whatever, that should take that right out of the equation if there was a quota. But then people would have to agree, you know, to fish under a quota system. It's worked well in other fisheries around the world.
Thank you, Ian. Great conversation around that. Is there any follow-up questions, other ideas, comments for Ian as we're getting close to the end? All right, well, I'm going to thank you, first of all, Ian, and for everything that you've brought to us today. It's been a wonderful education in lobster fishery and commodity boards and marketing and islandness. And I really appreciate you bringing all that you have to our understanding of all of these subjects. So again, thank you.